Hello everybody and welcome to the De Morgan Foundation's online lecture series. It's my great pleasure today to welcome our speaker Natalie Rigby for the talk Legendary Power Couples in Pre-Raphaelite Painting. So Natalie is the curator of the exhibition The Legend of King Arthur, a Pre-Raphaelite Love Story, which is a touring exhibition that some of you may have seen. It's currently on display at Tullie House in Carlisle, and it illustrates the many characters and stories using images from the show. Natalie is an inclusion-focused freelance curator with specialisms in modern and contemporary British art. Her practice centres around making art, exhibitions and collections accessible to everyone and demystifying academia to open up the industry to all audiences. Thank you so much, Natalie. It's my pleasure to welcome you today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for having me. My name's Natalie, and I used to work for Falmouth Art Gallery, but I'm now working as a freelance curator. I call myself a freelance curator, art enthusiast, and sometimes I call myself a cultural terrorist, which I probably shouldn't, but it seems the best description for what I do. My King Arthur expertise, if you can call it that, has come from a lifelong obsession with King Arthur that started in my teenage years when I used to visit Glastonbury with friends and discovered the tour and the cathedral and the supposed burial place of King Arthur and Guinevere. And the Arthurian legend has followed me throughout my career. And then it led me to curate an exhibition called The Legend of King Arthur, a Pre-Raphaelite Love Story, which is currently touring the country. So if you're anywhere near Tullie House in Carlisle, you can see it there. Or if you're anywhere in Cornwall, from June the 16th, you can come to Falmouth Art Gallery and see the exhibition there. So the exhibition has many works by the Pre-Raphaelite artists, and they are all King Arthur focused. So I know I don't need to tell this audience about the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, because I'm sure you're all very, very, very versed in the Pre-Raphaelites and what they stand for and their ideas and where they came from. So I am just going to talk to you about their love of the King Arthur legend. So it was my surprise, actually, to find out that the King Arthur legend had not been explored before in terms of the Pre-Raphaelite artists, because at least every single one of the artists have made one Arthurian subject painting. And I wanted to use this PowerPoint today to show you just a few, because there are many. Some of these pictures are in the exhibition and some of them aren't. I'll let you know as we go through. But basically, I wanted to talk to you about the legendary power couples, because the great thing about the Arthurian legend is it doesn't discriminate. So we have all different types of couples and all different types of love stories. And it's very interesting, because if you read the legends through the books and the literature, until you get to the Victorian era, everyone's included. So that's very interesting. So talking about the Legend of King Arthur, a Pre-Raphaelite Love Story exhibition, which is currently touring the country. Each exhibition's being curated for the location. So each location, so Tullie House, for instance, which is in Carlisle, has been chosen for its link to the legend. So Carlisle in particular was the place where Lancelot and Guinevere had their affair. And it's also it's supposedly where Guinevere went and joined a convent in her later life. And Cornwall has over 30 locations associated with the legend, and many more so since Tennyson's Idylls of a King, because Tennyson travelled down here twice to retrace King Arthur's footsteps. So if we could move on to our first slide, please. So this lovely painting here, which is by Frederick George Stevens, this is the first ever painting of an Arthurian subject. And I will just give you a quick audio description. So this is a knight kneeling down in the sand with a blue sky behind. The knight is wearing a brown vest over his chainmail, and he is carrying King Arthur, holding onto his hands and carrying him over his back. And King Arthur is wearing his usual chainmail and red tabard over the top. So this painting is called Mort d'Arthur, and it's painted by Frederick George Stevens. It was actually painted, although it's on the Tate website, because this painting is in the Tate collection. It's listed as being from 1850, but he actually started it before this and wrote a poem that accompanies this painting as well. The painting's unfinished, which is probably why it's never been on display. So it's, as far as I know, it's never been on display since the Tate acquired it. And as you can see, the faces aren't quite finished. So where King Arthur's face is, there is what looks like a beard, but isn't actually finished. And Bedivere has a blank face because that's not finished either. So King Arthur and Bedivere had the ultimate romance, with Bedivere remaining at Arthur's side throughout his reign. Bedivere is the only knight that Arthur entrusts with Excalibur to throw back to the Lady of the Lake after Arthur dies. Arthur's demise comes from Mordred telling him of Lancelot's affair with Guinevere. Lancelot flees to France in shame, and Arthur follows him to confront him. And during this time, Mordred seizes the throne, which he reckons is his right, as he thinks that he is Arthur's stepson. He manages to turn all the knights to his side due to Arthur's desertion, because Arthur's gone over to France to find Lancelot. But Bedivere is the only one that stays true to Arthur's side. So according to Mallory's version from 1485, after Arthur's death and he's returned Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake, Bedivere enters a hermitage led by the Archbishop of Canterbury and stays there for the rest of his life. In some tales, he's joined by Lancelot, who stays to conduct his own penitence for his betrayal. So this painting is a really, really lovely depiction of Arthur and Bedivere's very, very, very good friendship, which is why I've started the talk with this picture. And also, it's one of the first paintings of an Arthurian subject by a Pre-Raphaelite. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about Lancelot and Elaine. I'm sure you all want to hear about Arthur, Lancelot and Guinevere, but I'm going to talk to you about Lancelot and Elaine first. So this little drawing is it's actually attributed to William Holman Hunt, which I just find curious. So I'm going to describe this one for you as well. So this is a drawing, and it shows Elaine, or the Lady of Shalott, and she's stood over her weaving in her room with the mirror in the background, which reflects the window, with her depictions that she's been weaving around the window. And in the window, we can see a couple in the background, which she's turned away from. On the floor, there are balls of wool which are scattered where she's jumped up and spun round, and all of the wool is tangled around her waist. Now, what I find interesting about this is, if we could forward on to the next slide, please. This little study here is The Lady of Shalott by Elizabeth Siddal. So if we go back to Holman Hunt's version, you can see that it's very similar. So I do wonder if it's been wrongly attributed to Holman Hunt when actually it's a Lizzie Siddal. And I'd love your thoughts on this. So this study, which has been attributed to William Holman Hunt, was painted in 1850. He made many studies of the Lady of Shalott because he went on to make an oil panel of the Lady of Shalott, and he also did the book plates for Tennyson's Moxon's illustrated edition in 1857. So interestingly, when Holman Hunt created this illustration for Tennyson's poem, Tennyson was outraged that Holman Hunt had elaborated on his idea for the Lady of Shalott and was particularly put out by the tornado hair, which I believe, if we go a couple of slides on, you can see in the left-hand side. So here we have William Holman Hunt's etching or engraving for Tennyson's poems, with the Lady of Shalott's tornado hair, which is filling the top of the picture, and the mirror in the background, and then the balls of wool wrapped around her again. And this study on the right-hand side is the study for Eugenie Sellers for the Lady of Shalott painting, which was a lot later in 1895, because he did a couple of versions of it. The Lady of Shalott is one of the favourite tales of the Pre-Raphaelites, and there were many, many different depictions of it. And the Lady of Shalott story comes from the story of Elaine. So Elaine was called the Lily Maid of Astolat, and Lancelot happens upon her court, and there's a big jousting tournament going on, and he's desperate to joust, but because he's the most revered knight, most of the knights won't joust with him because they know that they'll lose, and through pride they don't want to joust with Lancelot because they know they'll lose. So what he does is he borrows a suit of armor from Elaine, which, if we go forward one, oh sorry, two, if we could go to the next one, here we are. So this is Elaine holding the suit of armor that Lancelot borrows to joust in the tournament. So Lancelot jousts in the tournament and obviously wins, but when he wins, in the process, he's injured. So he spends his time convalescing at the court of Astolat with Elaine by his side, making sure he's okay and nursing him back to health. And during this process, she falls in love with him. But when he comes round and she professes her love for him, she is very upset because he can't love her in return because he's in love with Guinevere, or at least he is devoted to Guinevere. So she asks him to leave and to be at the court with her, but he refuses because obviously he's the most revered knight in the land and he wants to carry on fighting for King Arthur. And so she is so utterly wounded from being spurned that she dies of a broken heart. And she asks on her deathbed to be laid in a boat with a letter that she's written to Lancelot, which if we go forward, we can see in this painting here. This is a bit of a bonus painting because it's not technically Pre-Raphaelite, but I wanted to add this in because this is by Sophie Anderson. And Sophie Anderson is a woman artist. She was actually the first woman artist to be collected by a national museum. So this painting is in the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. So she was the first woman artist to be acquired for a public collection. And she was also the first Cornish woman artist, because she's buried in our cemetery here in Falmouth. She was the first Cornish woman artist to raise over £1 million at auction for her No Walk Today, which was in 2000 and I think 7 or 8. So in this painting here, we can see Elaine, and she's laying in her bed with her weaving covering her. She's clutching her lilies to her chest. Her hair's sort of thrown all the way over the bed. She's clutching her letter in her hand, and there's a big banner in the boat, and the poor man who's rowing the boat is leant over holding his head, and because he's so upset because she's died. So we could assume that that's Elaine's father. And this is a depiction of her sailing down the river to Camelot. So she sails down the river and she happens upon the court at Camelot, and Arthur reads the letter, and he's so upset because this is, as far as Arthur's concerned, is not chivalry, and he's very upset with Lancelot and sends him away. So if we could go back to two slides, please. I just want to point out this Emma Sandys, because obviously we love our women artists. And this depiction is also of Elaine in her finery. And I think what Emma Sandys does really, really well here is all the elaborate detailing in all the textiles. So we could see here Elaine in her blue dress with an embroidered yellow collar. She's holding her hand to her face. She's wearing a beautiful gold headband with pearls, and her red hair is cascading down her back. She's got what looks like a leopard behind her, which I'm assuming is drapery. And then there's also drapery behind her in these beautiful reds and blues. It's a really lovely painting which is at Whittock Manor. And you can also see this painting in the exhibition if you get to go. So if we could forward, sorry, Sarah, we're going backwards and forwards. If we could go to the next one after this. So this is the Lady of Shalott that everyone knows. This is John William Waterhouse's Lady of Shalott. And this is the 1888 depiction of the Lady of Shalott. So this was actually his first painting of the Lady of Shalott. And then he carried on with the series and did another 2 in this series of paintings, which you can also see in the Falmouth show if you have time to go. So in this one, we see the Lady of Shalott in her white dress, sat in her barge. And it's a slightly different story in this one because instead of holding the letter, her story is that she lights, when she comes down from her tower, she gets in her boat, she writes Lady of Shalott down on the side of her boat. She takes her weaving with her. So if you, in the boat, you can see the weaving that she's made, which show the window scenes that she's seen through her mirror. And so her prophecy is that she lights her 3 candles, and by the time the 3rd candle goes out, she would have died. And that's her tragic end. but I do love the story of Elaine, because I feel that she is very much the master crafter of her own narrative. So I like to think of her as our Taylor Swift in a way, because even though she's been spurned by a man, she's caused him shame by telling his story to his court, and eventually he gets ejected from the court because of her story. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. This painting here is of Lancelot and Guinevere, who I know you're all dying to hear about. So this is by Rossetti. And this painting is actually in the British Museum. And this one was painted in 1854. And he returned to this subject in 1860 and produced another watercolor on the same theme. So in here, in this painting, we can see Guinevere, and this is after she's become a nun, and she's bent over Arthur's tomb, mourning King Arthur. And the tomb's beautifully carved. And on the side, there are paintings of all of the scenes from Arthur's time. But in this painting, which is obviously a very dramatic scene by Rossetti, we can see Lancelot taunting her. So he's leaning over Arthur's tomb and whispering in her ear, and she's pushing him away. And we know it's Lancelot because he's got his shield with his 3 red stripes, because he had 3 red stripes on his shield to show that he was as strong as 3 men. So Lancelot, throughout the legend, he's probably the most well-known character. We all know the story of Lancelot and Guinevere and how it eventually causes the Battle of Camlan, where Arthur eventually dies. But I never sort of spend too much time talking about Lancelot, because, as my teenage son would say, he's overplayed. But Lancelot comes into the picture. He kind of comes across because he's heard all these stories. He comes across from France because he's heard all these stories about King Arthur and wants to know what the deal is. And he challenges most of the knights to duels and wins easily, and which is why he's asked to join the court at Camelot. His real name's actually Lancelot du Lac. And there are many different stories about Lancelot and how he came to be, some more sensational than others. For instance, one of the Arthurian tales has him raised by fairies in a wood. But it's his love for Guinevere that causes his ultimate demise and leads to the fall of Camelot. Lancelot, Guinevere and Arthur are the most controversial love triangle. And everyone loves a love triangle, but it also echoes the real life love triangle that was happening between Rossetti, William Morris and his wife Jane, who they actually lived together for a time. So Rossetti's relationships are fascinating. His addictive and almost competitive relationship with Lizzie Siddal, his live-in relationship with his housekeeper Fanny Cornforth, and his stalking of Alice Wilding shows his love of women, or stunners as he would call them, and also his love of redheads, which is, why obviously I like him so much. But he did have an obsessive nature right down to his collecting of exotic animals. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk to you now about Tristan and Isolde, or Tristram and Isolde, because the 2 characters also have different names throughout the legend. So in the French tales, it's Isolde, and in the Cornish tales it's Isolde. So it depends which one you'd like to choose, really. So this lovely painting here is by William Morris, and it's actually his only easel painting. And you can see this in the show if you can get to the show. Now, this is called La Belle Isolde. It's had different titles throughout its time. And this painting here shows Isolde or Isolde in her room. And you can see here that William Morris has spent a long time lovingly painting in all the details. So, which obviously goes on to show his arts and craft passion, because the figure, although it's the main character, is not quite so lovingly painted as all the details are in the background. So in the background we can see sort of there's motifs on the wall, there's people sat in the background, there's drapes, and there's tapestries, and there's a carpeted floor, and just all these beautiful emblems just in the background of the painting. And there's also a little dog, if you can see, which is just in on the bed, and there's a bowl of oranges, and it's all this kind of it's stood there in her beautiful dress, which is also lovingly painted, but she looks so sad. So this painting is of Jane Burden before they married, and it has been titled Queen Guinevere in the past. Morris actually used to call this painting his Guinevere, because it was his nickname for Jane. And he also published a volume of poetry in 1858, which accompanied this painting, called The Defence of Guinevere. So we now know that it's actually a portrait of Princess Isolde or Isolde, because of the dog, which is curled up on the bed, because Isolde or Isolde always had her dog with her at all times. So Sir Tristan, very proudly, because I'm obviously in Cornwall, is our Cornish knight, and he is Cornwall's bravest knight and was a henchman for King Mark of Cornwall. And King Mark had arranged to marry Princess Isolde of Ireland, or Isolde the Fair. So he sends Tristan to Ireland to fetch his bride, but Tristan has already been to Ireland and upset a whole load of people by murdering a giant. So when Tristan arrives in Ireland, he changes his name to Tram Trist to go unnoticed. And so Queen Isolde, because she's also called Isolde, has concocted a potion for her daughter to ensure a happy marriage. So if we could go forward one. Now, I don't know if Sarah will agree with me here, but I like to think that this painting, which is called The Love Potion by Evelyn de Morgan, is actually of Queen Isolde, Isolde's mother, because here she is concocting her love potion. She's got her books of sorcery in the background. She's got her black cat at her feet. She's in a beautiful golden gown. And in the background out the window, we can see a couple stood embracing, which I like to think is Tristan and Isolde. So here she is, she's concocting her love potion so that Isolde can have a happy marriage to King Mark. And if we could go on just one, please. This is a painting of Tristan and Isolde again by Rossetti. And this is Tristan and Isolde drinking the love potion on the boat. So they mistakenly think that the potion is wine, and they drink it because they're thirsty, and they fall hopelessly in love with each other. So in this painting, we can see Tristan on the right-hand side, kissing Isolde's hand, and she's holding the potion, as he is as well. There's an angel in the background, and Isolde's wearing a beautiful blue dress with orange, well, reddy orange sleeves. And you can see that they're inside in the hull of the boat, and you can just about see the outside of the boat in the background. So the angel in the corner, I like to think, is a mischievous angel kind of flying over his shoulder, almost to insinuate the naughtiness that's going on here. So if we could go to the next one, please. So this painting here is King Mark and La Belle Isolte. So this is King Mark and his new wife. And King Mark's there looking very angry. It's a curious painting, this one. And this one is by Sir Edward Burne-Jones, and it's a watercolour. But there's some really beautiful symbolism there in the flowers. So Isolde's there with King Mark, and King Mark's kind of gesturing towards her, and she doesn't look entirely comfortable. She's kind of leaning in, almost like she has to, and it just doesn't look like a very comfortable portrait, really. And then if we forward on one, please. This painting shows, this is by Ford Madox Brown, and it's called The Death of Sir Tristram. And this is when King Mark orders his henchmen to kill Sir Tristan, because obviously Tristan's been having an affair with his wife over the years, and they've run off a few times. So one time they flee to the forest of Moresque, and then another time they hide at the Hermitage Ogren's chapel at Roche in Cornwall. And in the end, King Mark's soldiers find Tristan and they imprison him in a tower at Chapel Point. But Tristan escapes out the window by jumping out the window and fleeing over the rocks. And that window is now known as Tristan's Leap. So in this painting by Ford Madox Brown, we can see Tristan, who's laying on the floor, wounded, with his lovely pointed slippers, and Isolde's weeping over him, and her dog is in the background. King Mark's leaning over with a sword, which he's used to kill Sir Tristan, and there's a couple of ladies in the background in a window, sort of leaning in the window to see what's going on and have a good gossip. So if we could go on one, please. I'm going to talk to you about Merlin and Vivian, because I can't talk about King Arthur without mentioning Merlin, because the Arthurian tales are his story. And the whole of the Arthurian legend is his narrative. So this painting is by Arthur Hughes, and it's called The Rift Within the Lute. It was painted in 1867 and is a collection of Tullie House in Carlisle. And The Rift Within the Lute is taken from the poem Merlin and Vivian from Tennyson's poems published in 1857. And this shows Vivian laying down in a wood with snowdrops and bluebells behind her. She's got her, I don't know the instrument. I'm sure one of you will. I want to say mandolin, but I might be wrong. Oh no, of course it's a lute, isn't it? So yes, she's laying there with her lute. So Vivian is a young enchantress that Merlin meets as an old man. She's actually 16 years old when he meets her. So he's way too old for her, because he's an old man by this time, and she taunts him with it. She uses her bewitching ways to convince Merlin to reveal his magic to her. And he spends a long time teaching her magic and sorcery, under the pretense that if he does, Vivian will then marry him. However, once again, another strong woman, she once she's gained all his knowledge, she uses it to encase Merlin under a rock to get rid of him. Now, the rock is actually known as Merlin's Cave at Tintagel here in Cornwall. So we can also blame Vivian for King Arthur's ultimate demise, because when Mordred is fighting King Arthur at the Battle of Camlan, Merlin's not available to help him because he's under the rock, can't get out. So if we could go on one, please. This is a painting of Merlin and Nimue by Sir Edward Burne-Jones. But for this, because obviously this is my interpretation of the legend, I actually believe it's a representation of Vivian. And the reason I think that is because if you, in this painting, you'll see the female figure is in the foreground. She's reading a book of sorcery, which I'm assuming is Merlin's. Merlin's chasing after her. And just in front of Merlin's feet there's a big hole. And I think her game is that she's gonna lead Merlin to the hole where he's gonna fall in, and then she's gonna encase him under a rock. So if we could go on one, please. This is also an Edward Burne-Jones. This is the very famous Beguiling of Merlin, which is in Lady Lever Art Gallery. And this also has Vivian stood in front, leaning back and looking at Merlin and bewitching him. And he's actually been caught up in I believe it's a hawthorn bush, where he gets trapped, which is where she's led him. So I'm never 100% sure if Nimue and Vivian are one and the same person, but for my interpretation, because obviously we all probably have a different interpretation. I always think that Nimue is the keeper of Excalibur and the Lady of the Lake, while Vivian is the enchantress associated with Morgan Le Fay. But to be quite honest, we can never have enough powerful women in these stories. So if we could go on one, please. So I'm going to use this painting, which is John Everett Millet's The Knight Errant, which is at the Tate. It's painted in 1870. This one's not actually in the exhibition. It's a bit of a bonus. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I interpret this painting as the story of Sir Gareth and the Lady Lyonesse. Now, the lady in this painting, she's actually naked. She's tied to a tree, and the knight has seen off her captors who are running off in the background. It's twilight. You can see the moon in the background, and she's turning away from the knight in shame because of her nakedness. So the knight errant first appears in the 14th century French tale Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And although the actual knight is not named, a knight errant means a knight who goes above and beyond to protect his ladies in the name of chivalry. So Lady Lyonesse has been captured by the Red Knight and sent her sister Dame Lynette to seek help from Arthur's court. Now, Sir Gareth at this point is actually only a kitchen boy and has been a kitchen boy for a year. So Arthur bestows the honour onto him to prove himself. So Sir Gareth sets off with Dame Lynette and his trusted dwarf squire. Along the way, Lynette's really upset with him, the fact that she's only got a kitchen. Sorry, that's my cat in the background. So Lynette's upset that she's only got a kitchen boy to help her. And so she continuously insults him for not being a knight and for being just a sheer kitchen boy. But along the way, Sir Gareth is challenged by many knights and wins, and eventually it wins her favour. And then she goes on to reveal that she's not actually the Lady Leoness, because she's been playing the role of Lady Leoness when actually it's her sister. So when Sir Gareth arrives at the castle, he actually meets the Lady Leoness and who falls in love with him, and gives him a magical colour-changing ring, which is said to stop the wearer from drawing blood, and also disguises his true identity. So this gives Sir Gareth an opportunity to kind of show his prowess and chivalry, and to fight other knights without anyone knowing who he is and the fact that he's a sheer kitchen boy. And he defeats the mysterious Red Knight. And because his dwarf squire has been spreading rumours about this mysterious undefeated knight, he's also challenged by all the other knights of the Round Table. But the dwarf tricks Gareth's ring away, so he actually steals Gareth's ring, so he can't use the power of not showing his identity. And when the knights find out his true identity, they refuse to battle him. But it all ends perfectly happily, because he goes on to marry the Lady Leoness, and Sir Agravain marries Dame Lynette. So if we could go on to the next one, please. Now, this is the last one I'm going to show you, I believe. So this painting is obviously not of a power couple and not of a knight, but I wanted to give a special mention here to our Arthurian gay couple, which is Sir Galehaut and Sir Lancelot. So there are no known paintings of Sir Galehaut, but to represent them, I wanted to use Simeon Solomon, who at the time of this drawing, or at the time of his career, was a proud Jewish gay man. And his paintings have a distinct queer gaze. This little caricature, which shows, which it's called Sir Galehaut and bearing the Holy Grail, sorry. So it's a little cup of gruel with arms and legs, with a sword and a shield, which is quite hilarious. But I like to think that probably Simeon Solomon was having a bit of a laugh at all his contemporaries who were making Arthurian subject matter paintings at the time. So Simeon Solomon was a talented painter, was good friends with Rossetti and Burne-Jones, and was also great friends with Algernon Charles Swinburne, and illustrated his erotic novel Lesbia Brandon, which was never published as it was considered pornographic. Tragically, in 1873, he was arrested for soliciting and charged with indecent exposure, and he was found guilty, fined and sent to prison, and then later the workhouse. And unfortunately, he resorted to alcoholism, and although he still worked and still made paintings, he never exhibited again. So Sir Galehaut was a knight, and a half giant, and he was known as the invincible Lord of the Distant Isles, and King Arthur hears of his fame and travels with a band of knights to overthrow him and take his land. So Sir Galehaut is known to be undefeatable, and not just undefeatable, but the undefeatable son of a giant, and he's a towering man. But when Arthur arrives, he's not deterred from fighting until he meets Lancelot. So Sir Galehaut meets Lancelot and becomes absolutely infatuated with him. So his relationship with Lancelot develops to the point where he can't bear to battle with Lancelot. And so in the end, he gives up his political ambitions, his realms, all his lands, and hands over his complete power to Arthur. Now, as I said in the beginning, one of the things I love about the Arthurian legend is that well, before the Victorian era anyway, when everything became sanitized, a bit more sanitized, there was no restrictions to the tales at all. There are queer couples, there are bromances, and there's even a bit of pansexuality, which I find absolutely fascinating. So if we could just go on one, please. That's the end of my talk. And I hope that was okay.
Hello, sorry, I had a little bit of trouble coming out of the PowerPoint then. Got a bit stuck in the digital ether. Thank you so much, Natalie. What a really inspiring talk for someone like myself who has only really dabbled in these tales through learning about them through the Pre-Raphaelites. It's your in-depth kind of cross-sectioning of those tales and highlighting them through the paintings. It's just been really enlightening, and it was so relaxing and calming as well, the way you gave those beautiful descriptions of the pictures. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the jumping backwards and forwards.
Oh, not at all. So yeah, I don't know what was going on with the computer. Sometimes one click would do it, and sometimes it was going all over the place. So yeah, huge apology.
I'd love to know everybody's thoughts on that, on the Lizzie Siddal Lady of Shalott drawing. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm also really intrigued. I haven't actually been able to see the show in Carlisle yet. I did manage to see it at the William Morris Gallery in Walthamstow.
It's much bigger.
Do let us know if you've seen either of those, and about the drawings. And then I think there were a couple of other ideas you had about interpreting pictures that had almost anonymizing titles that took them one step away from the tales themselves. So the Knight Errant and the Love Potion, the Evelyn de Morgan picture. And I think it's so intelligent what you've done, Natalie, with this show, is to pull back some narrative to the pictures. And you're very open about it, that it's your speculation and your interpretation of those paintings. But that's something else that I think it's interesting to hear people's ideas on. And without attaching those tales onto paintings, which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, it's almost like we'll never question whether they are about something other than what we think they are. So yeah, just huge congratulations on the show and the way you've put it together and the way you've drawn these paintings and sort of almost put them back into the arena and into the narrative. I've really enjoyed watching that come together from the very first time you asked me to borrow the painting.
I was so nervous asking you to borrow that painting, and especially putting the Tristan and Isolde spin on it, because you're never quite sure if people, you know, because some people just if they know a painting as one thing, they don't like to.
Yeah, absolutely. But I always think, without putting a painting in these different frames and allowing people's speculations and musings to be in the public arena, then no one's ever going to question the status quo. And I think it's so important that we do that, particularly when it comes to authorship, like you have done with the Siddal Waterhouse drawing. That's a very long way of saying thank you and also posing a question.
Sorry.
When did you first see the de Morgan picture and sort of think about almost reattributing the narrative, I suppose, to the Arthurian legend?
It was in the early days of my research, actually. So that would have been a long time ago, and I kind of looked at it, and I looked at all, because there's been a lot of writing about that painting, actually. But the thing that made me think it was Tristan and Isolde was the couple in the background. That's where it is for me, and the fact that Queen Isolde, she is a sorceress, so the fact that she's got all of her books there, and the black cat, I've also got my black cat who's been chasing things all the way through that. So sorry about the bell ringing. Yeah, I just thought it was a really interesting way to look at that painting.
Fabulous, thank you. I can see the chat box kind of going off, so I will get some of the other people's questions to you as well. Lots of thank yous. Caroline says, wow, thank you, Natalie. From Susan, fascinating talk. Thank you. someone, sorry, people's names are coming through as your screen name. So someone just, LH, has said that she thought the drawing was Siddle as soon as it came on the screen. So people in agreement there. Question from Margaretta. Have you discussed your attribution of the Lady of Shalott drawing with any other scholars, and has given some examples, Glenda Youde or Jan Marsh?
I haven't yet, no. All I've done, because I looked at it and I kind of did that thing where you go, oh,
You just know.
yeah, you're like, and then you don't, in a way, you kind of don't feel qualified to make that assumption either. So, because obviously it's I mean, it's not my collection. I don't know what they have in their archive, and it's the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia. So it's a long way away as well. But I did email them. I emailed the curator, and I kind of pointed them at Rupert Mars's Lizzie Siddle and said, you know, have you seen this? And then I also pointed them at the other Holman Hunt drawings to show that they're not similar at all. So fingers crossed we might get some response, but none as yet. But that was only a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure they've, like every collections manager, they've probably got a backlog of work.
Right, it's fascinating, and I think everybody, you know, I'm right in saying everybody on this call would love to be kept up to date with what sort of comes of that. And even if nothing comes of it, it's always interesting to have these ideas and have these other thoughts. What
I'm desperate to do is I'm desperate to do a talk on Tennyson's Cornwall, because his retracing of the legend around Cornwall, it is absolutely fascinating. And obviously Holman Hunt and Prinsep came down here and they were working on the lizard. There's a whole story, and it's actually, so I've read all the diaries, it's actually hilarious. So all of their different diaries reading about the trip, it's just, yeah, it's really funny. So at some point I will do that.
Sarah McGlynn, who I know is at Tullie House, has posted that the exhibition runs until the 3rd of June. That's useful information, Sarah. Thank you. I'm sure people will get to you if they can. I think a question from Anne, but it's quite long, so let me read it. Thanks, Anne. Could interest in Arthurian legends by pre-Raphaelites be due to parallels with the lives of the painters, such as homosocial relationships like Burne-Jones and Morris, Swinburne and the circle of Rossetti and Burne-Jones, whilst young, of a chaste Galahad society, and of course Rossetti's triangle relationships? And she says she's always found the author's tomb a rather phallic and sexually charged.
Yes, absolutely. I've found some reading the legend, because obviously there's so many versions of it, but reading some of the legends, some of it's absolutely shocking, scandalous. But yes, I mean, that's why I wanted to do power couples, because in a way it kind of, the Arthurian tales do echo what's going on in their private lives, which is probably why they liked interpreting them so much, really.
And it does seem to be that theme of love more than anything from the tales that absolutely captures their imagination, doesn't it? And when you frame it like this in a talk, and there are so many examples of that, it's quite obvious. We've got a couple of disagreements, or at least saying without seeing the drawings together properly, it doesn't seem convincingly a Siddle. And Sue saying that the Hunt sketch is more competent than Lizzie. So always good to have these differing opinions, and to see what people think, like you say, Natalie.
Yeah, I love a debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for Natalie about anything in the talk today? So nothing coming through, and we're just within the hour as well, so that's perfect timing, really. Thank you very much, Natalie, again for joining us today and for such a wonderful and enlightening talk. Thank you, Sarah, for reminding us that you have until the 3rd of June to see the exhibition up at Tullie House in Carlisle before it opens at Falmouth Art Gallery. I think I'm right in saying the 17th of June, but do check the website.
Something like that.
A diary entry. And huge thanks to everybody else who's online today, who's come and listened to the talk, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. Do have a look at the De Morgan Foundation website for more of these online events. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Next time. Thanks, Natalie. Bye-bye.